The sound that first alerted Karen Becker to the violation was not a sound at all, but a color. It was an offensive, retina-searing slash of lime green against the muted HOA-approved symphony of beiges, grays, and taupes that defined the Crestwood Meadows community. It was 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the color, which she would later learn was officially named Electric Lizard, was emanating from a low-slung sports car parked with insolent disregard for the sacred geometry of the neighborhood. The vehicle, belonging to the new resident at number 42, a tech bro type named Alex Chen, had its left rear tire touching not on but touching the pristine white line of its own designated parking space. The bumper, a carbon fiber monstrosity that looked like an aeronautical weapon, jutted a scandalous 3 inches over the public sidewalk. For anyone else, this would be a minor annoyance, a footnote in the day. For Karen Becker, president of the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association, it was a declaration of war. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a familiar rhythm of righteous indignation that she had come to associate with purpose. Richard, her late husband, had always said, "Order is the foundation of a civilized life." He had been the first HOA president. She was his legacy in this community, with its meticulously manicured lawns and 347-page covenant of rules and regulations, was her cathedral. This electric lizard was a gargoyle spray-painted on the front door. She didn't march over to knock on the door. That was for amateurs. Amateurs engaged in messy, unpredictable verbal confrontations. Karen operated with the cold, irrefutable precision of bureaucracy. She returned to her own immaculate home, number 41, directly across the street, a perfect panopticon for monitoring neighborhood compliance, and went to her office. The room was a shrine to administrative order. Filing cabinets were labeled with military precision. On her desk, beside a framed photo of a smiling Richard, sat a stack of violation notice stickers. They were a satisfyingly aggressive shade of orange. She filled out the details with her favorite pen, a fine-tipped Pilot G2 that lent an air of gravity to her script. Violation 7.4 Improper vehicle positioning. Violation Section 11.2 Obstruction of pedestrian walkway. Notes: rear driver's side tire is in contact with the demarcation line. Front bumper overhangs sidewalk by approximately 3 inches. Vehicle color, electric lizard, may be subject to review under Section 15.1, Aesthetic Harmony. She felt a free song of pleasure as she added that last part. It was a beautiful catch-all clause that gave her immense discretionary power. Peeling the sticker from its backing was a small, sacramental act. The adhesive was notoriously aggressive, a feature she had personally lobbied for at the last supplier, meaning it would leave a stubborn, papery residue that would take at least 20 minutes of goo-gone and frustrated scrubbing to remove. It was a physical manifestation of the offender's inconvenience, a small penance for their sin against order. She strode across the street, the morning sun glinting off her perfectly coiffed blonde helmet of hair. The air was still and quiet, save for the hum of a distant lawnmower operating within its approved 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. window. She affixed the orange sticker squarely in the center of the driver's side window, smoothing it down with a firm, satisfying motion. It looked glorious against the tinted glass, a beacon of justice. For the rest of the day, she watched from her living room window, sipping chamomile tea and pretending to read a novel. She saw him emerge around 3 p.m. Alex Chen. He was younger than she'd thought, probably not even 30. He wore a t-shirt with some cryptic code on it, and torn jeans, a violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of the unwritten dress code of Crestwood Meadows. He walked to his car, saw the sticker, and stopped. Karen leaned forward, her grip tightening on her teacup. She was waiting for the anger, the confused frustration, the fist shaken at the sky. Instead, he laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed in the quiet street. He pulled out his phone, took a picture of the sticker, and then, to Karen's utter astonishment, he got into his car and simply drove away, the orange violation flapping in the wind like a flag of defiance. He hadn't even tried to scrape it off. This was a new kind of enemy. Richard had dealt with grumpy retirees who overwatered their lawns, or families whose children left bicycles on the grass. They were predictable. They would grumble. They would comply. This Alex character, he was different. He was amused. It was as if her authority, her entire system of belief, was a joke to him. The next morning, the electric lizard was back. This time, it was parked with comical precision, perfectly centered in its space. The tires a good 6 inches from any line. A small victory, she thought. The sticker was gone, but her sense of triumph was short-lived. Later that week, a massive delivery truck, far larger than the approved commercial vehicle size outlined in Section 9.3, rumbled down the street and parked in front of number 42. It blocked the road for a full 45 minutes, forcing poor Mrs. Higgins from number 46 to execute a stressful 17-point turn to get her sedan out. Karen was already on the phone with the HOAS legal counsel before the truck's air brakes had finished hissing. She documented everything: the time, the duration, the license plate, the name of the freight company, Modern Art Logistics. Workers unloaded a colossal crate. When they finally uncrated its contents on Alex's front lawn, Karen's blood pressure skyrocketed. It was a sculpture, a 10-foot tall, twisted monstrosity of polished chrome and what looked like salvaged industrial scrap metal. It gleamed in the sun, a chaotic, metallic tumor on the pristine green canvas of the neighborhood. It looked like a factory had exploded and they'd welded the shrapnel together. It was a direct assault on Section 15.1. Aesthetic harmony. It was a chrome middle finger pointed directly at her. She fired off a formal cease and desist letter, citing the covenant and giving him 48 hours to remove the offending structure. She had it delivered by certified mail. The response came 2 days later, not in the mail, but via an email to the official HOA account. Subject: your letter, and my fabulous sculpture, dear Ms. Becker. Thank you for your correspondence regarding my new lawn ornament. I've affectionately named him Sir Reginald von Glimmerstein. I hope you like it. Regarding your citation of Section 15.1 for aesthetic harmony, I'd like to draw your attention to the city permit number 734B, which I have attached. It classifies Sir Reginald as a work of fine art, pre-approved by the Municipal Arts Council. Furthermore, if you'll review the Crestwood Meadows founding charter, I do admire its thoroughness. By the way, it's a fascinating read. Note in Addendum C, page 212, that any installations approved by the city's Arts Council are exempt from HOA aesthetic review. It seems your predecessor, a Mr. Richard Becker, any relation, was quite the patron of the arts and wanted to ensure the neighborhood didn't stifle legitimate artistic expression. A very forward-thinking man. Have a wonderful day. Beth Alex Chen, 42 Crestwood Meadows. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. She frantically pulled the thick, leather-bound copy of the Covenant from her shelf. She'd read it 100 times, memorized entire sections. But Addendum C, it was added in the final revision, a compromise Richard had made with the city. To get the initial development plan approved, he had complained about it for weeks, calling it a bureaucratic Trojan horse. He had assured her it would never be an issue. Who would bother getting a city permit for a bird? She stared at the chrome monstrosity across the street. Sir Reginald von Glimmerstein. It was mocking her. And Alex Chen had used her own husband's legacy, her sacred text, against her. The casual, almost breezy tone of his email was the ultimate insult. He wasn't just breaking her rules. He was enjoying it. He was playing a game, and he had just scored a decisive point. The war had escalated. It was no longer about parking lines or sculptures. It was about the soul of Crestwood Meadows. It was about her honor. Her grip tightened on the useless cease and desist letter, crumpling it in her fist. A new resolve hardened within her. He wanted to play games. Fine. Karen Becker knew a few games of her own, and in her games, the homeowners association always won. She just needed to find a rule he couldn't bypass, a trap he couldn't see coming. Her eyes narrowed as she looked out the window, past the offensive sculpture, to the wide, inviting expanse of his empty driveway. An idea, terrible and brilliant, began to form. The failure of the sculpture gambit sent Karen into a state of strategic seclusion. The casual way Alex had weaponized Richard's own words against her felt like a personal betrayal, a ghostly echo of her husband's siding with the enemy. For 3 days, she did not issue a single violation notice. Brenda from number 38 let her dog relieve itself on the common area lawn without so much as a warning letter. Mr. Henderson at number 21 left his recycling bin out a full 8 hours past the Tuesday 7 p.m. deadline. Karen saw it all from her window, her teeth grinding, but she held back. A frontal assault had failed. It was time for espionage and unconventional warfare. Her new obsession became Alex Chen's routine. She learned that he worked from home, a fact that planted a new, fertile seed of suspicion in her mind. Unregistered home business, a clear violation of 18.4. She documented the frequent arrivals of couriers and delivery vans. She noted the late hours, with lights blazing in his office until well past midnight. Most damningly, she cataloged the guests. They arrived not in sensible sedans or family-friendly SUVs, but in Tesla's Autos, and one particularly ostentatious Maserati. They were young, dressed in expensive casual wear, and carried laptops. They would stay for hours, and the low hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter would drift across the manicured lawns. These weren't social calls. This was a startup, a tech incubator, a clandestine commercial enterprise operating under the guise of a residential dwelling. This was her angle. The sculpture was a stationary target. His entire lifestyle was a broad, moving front of non-compliance. She convened an emergency meeting of the HOA board. The other 2 members were Gerald, the treasurer, a perpetually nervous man who looked like he might faint if presented with an unexpected invoice, and Brenda, the secretary, whose primary motivation for being on the board was access to high gossip. He's running a business, Karen declared, slapping a thin file folder onto the polished surface of her dining room table. She had chosen her home for the meeting to project an aura of command, a full-blown, unregistered commercial operation. We have courier traffic, undocumented employees or consultants. I'm sure he calls them and noise pollution. After approved hours, Brenda leaned forward, her eyes wide with excitement. I thought I heard laughing at 11 p.m. last night. It sounded productive. Gerald wrung his hands, his gaze darting between Karen and the folder as if it might contain a live scorpion. A business? Oh my. Are you sure, Karen? The covenants on home businesses are quite strict. The legal fees for enforcement could be the cost of inaction is far greater. Gerald, Karen cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. Today, it's a stealth startup. Tomorrow, it's a taco stand on his front lawn. We must cut the head off the snake. I propose we engage McGill & Sons to draft a formal letter of inquiry, demanding he disclose the nature of his activities at number 42, citing Section 18.4. McGill & Sons were the HOA's notoriously aggressive lawyers, a firm that charged by the syllable and took a kind of unholy glee in drafting threatening correspondence. Gerald paled. McGill Karen. They cost $600 an hour. My preliminary budget forecast for Q3 is already tight. This is not a budget issue, Gerald. It's an existential one, Karen insisted, fixing him with a stare that could curdle milk. He thinks our rules are a suggestion. He thinks Richard's legacy is a joke. We must show him the full power and authority of this association. All in favor. She raised her hand. Brenda, swept up in the drama, eagerly raised hers. Gerald's hand went up with the speed and enthusiasm of a man being asked to volunteer for a shark tagging expedition, but it went up. The motion passed. The letter from McGill & Sons was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese. It was 6 pages long and used phrases like material breach, cease all commercial activities forthwith, and failure to comply will result in significant financial penalties and potential liens against the property. Karen read it 3 times before approving it, savoring every thinly veiled threat. This, she thought, was an attack he couldn't deflect with a city permit or a witty email. This was the law. The response came a week later, not to the HOA or to McGill & Sons, but directly to Karen's personal mailbox. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, her name and address printed in elegant, raised lettering. Inside was a letter from the law firm of Sterling, Thorne, and Davenport, a name that made McGill & Sons sound like a pair of ambulance chasers working out of a strip mall. The paper was so thick it felt like currency. Dear Miss Becker, this firm represents Mr. Alexander Chen in the matter of your recent correspondence, forwarded to us by McGill & Sons. While Mr. Chen appreciates the HOA's commitment to maintaining neighborhood standards, your accusations are categorically false and demonstrably baseless. Mr. Chen is a private venture capitalist. He does not operate a business from his home in the sense prescribed by Section 18.4 of your covenant. He engages in private consultations and hosts occasional professional gatherings, activities not materially different from a lawyer reviewing a brief at home or an accountant meeting a client for coffee. Your evidence of courier traffic and guests constitutes a gross mischaracterization of normal residential life. Furthermore, your continued pattern of targeted harassment, including but not limited to photographic surveillance of his property, a potential violation of privacy laws, repeated and unwarranted violation notices for trivial matters, and now, baseless legal threats, is deeply concerning. Mr. Chen has, until now, regarded your actions with a degree of bemused tolerance. That tolerance is now exhausted. This letter serves as a formal request that you and the Crestwood Meadows HOA cease and desist all further harassment of our client. Any further unsubstantiated accusations, frivolous notices, or threatening correspondence will be met with a vigorous and robust legal response, including a potential countersuit seeking damages for harassment, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We trust this clarifies the situation. Consider this our only warning. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance, Partner Sterling. Thorne and Davenport. Karen's hands were trembling as she finished reading. The letter was a nuclear bomb. The phrases targeted harassment, countersuit, and intentional infliction of emotional distress swam before her eyes. They hadn't just refuted her claims. They had turned the tables completely, painting her as the villain, the aggressor, and they had named her personally. She immediately called an emergency board meeting. This time, there was no pretense of command. She read the letter aloud, her voice wavering for the first time. The effect on her 2 board members was profound. Brenda's gossipy excitement curdled into fear. Gerald looked as if he was about to have a stroke. A countersuit, he squeaked, his face the color of putty. Emotional distress. Karen, their letterhead is embossed. Do you know what embossed? Letterhead costs. We can't fight them. The HOA will be bankrupted. My pension is tied to my home value. We can't just surrender. Karen shot back, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. He's bluffing, is he? Brenda asked, her voice a nervous whisper. Karen, you have been watching him a lot. I saw you with the binoculars last Tuesday. It's a little intense. Karen felt a flush of betrayal. I was performing my duties as president. I was gathering evidence. You used your own car to block his driveway for 20 minutes last month when his friends were arriving. I saw you, Brenda added, her voice rising. He just sat in his car and waited for you to move. What if he has that on his doorbell camera? That's not evidence. Karen, that's just being a nuisance. Karen had forgotten about that. In a moment of pure, unadulterated frustration, she had indeed parked her beige sedan diagonally behind his car, blocking him, and she had rationalized it as preventing a potential noise violation before it began. He hadn't honked or yelled. He had just waited, watching her with that same infuriatingly calm amusement. After 20 minutes of simmering in her own car, feeling increasingly foolish, she had pulled away. She had hoped no one had noticed. "We have to retract the letter," Gerald said, his voice firm for the first time in his life. "We have to apologize. We have to tell McGill to stand down. Now, Karen, before we all get sued into oblivion." Defeated? Karen nodded. She felt a profound sense of humiliation. He had outmaneuvered her at every turn. He'd used the covenant against her, and now he was using the actual real-world law against her. He had stripped her of her authority, turned her allies against her, and made her a laughingstock. The war was lost. Or was it? As she sat alone that night, the Sterling, Thorne, and Davenport letter sitting on her table like a death sentence, a different kind of feeling began to replace the fear and humiliation. It was a cold, hard rage. He had called her actions harassment. He had threatened her. He had made her feel small in her own kingdom. This was no longer about rules or regulations. This was personal. The law had failed her. The covenant had failed her. Bureaucracy was useless against a man like this. She looked out the window at his house. The lights were on in his office. He was in there, probably laughing about his victory with his high-powered lawyer. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. She looked at his wide, empty two-car driveway. It was a perfect regulation-compliant stretch of dark gray pavement, but it was also a vulnerability. It was his point of entry and exit. Control that, and the retreat was tactical. Karen Becker spent a week radiating an aura of utter defeat. She tendered a formal, if glacially toned, apology to Alex Chen via the board, which Gerald practically sprinted across the street to deliver. She instructed McGill and Sons to withdraw their letter and send a bill for their fruitless, expensive saber. To the casual observer, the war was over, and Karen had been soundly thrashed. She even gave a weak, dismissive wave to Alex one morning as he jogged past her house. He returned it with a nod, that infuriatingly placid expression on his face. He thought he had won. This was exactly what she wanted. Behind the curtains of number 41, a new campaign was being planned, one that bypassed lawyers and covenants entirely. This was a war of physics and municipal code. Her plan was audacious, petty, and, she believed, flawlessly legal. She was going to use the city's own bureaucracy against him. Her days were now spent not poring over the HOA covenant, but over Crestwood's public zoning maps and permit applications, which she accessed at the downtown municipal office. The clerks, used to developers and contractors, were initially bewildered by the intensely focused woman in the sensible cardigan asking for easement, plats, and curb-cut regulations for her residential street. She learned the precise legal definition of public rights-of-way. She learned that the first 3 feet of every lawn bordering the street, including the flared entrance of a driveway, was technically city property. A utility easement, homeowners, were required to maintain it, but they did not have ultimate authority over it. This was the key. The entrance to Alex Chen's driveway was not, legally speaking, his. Her plan solidified. She wouldn't block his driveway with a car. She would block it with landscape architecture, specifically, with 2 enormous, reinforced concrete planters, the kind the city used downtown to prevent cars from ramming into buildings. She found the perfect loophole. In Section 24, Article D, of the city's Public Works Code, property owners may, at their own expense and with an approved beautification permit, install decorative landscaping within the public utility easement, provided it does not obstruct sidewalk access or utility crew right-of-way. The planters would not obstruct the sidewalk, they would frame it. They would not obstruct utility access. The water and gas lines were on the other side of the lawn, but if placed with surgical precision, one on each side of his driveway's entrance, they would narrow the opening from a generous 12 feet to just under 7, wide enough for a pedestrian, wide enough perhaps for a bicycle, but completely, utterly impassable for a car the width of the electric lizard. The permit application was a work of art. She described her project as the Crestwood Meadows Gateway Beautification Initiative. She wrote of her desire to enhance the aesthetic character of the neighborhood entrance and provide a welcoming floral display for residents and visitors. She included sketches of the planters filled with cheerful, non-invasive marigolds. She paid the $75 application fee and the $250 beautification bond with a triumphant flourish of her checkbook. 2 weeks later, an official city envelope arrived. Permit approved. The day of the installation was one of the happiest of Karen's life. She hired a landscape contractor, the most expensive one in town, to ensure the job was done with impeccable, irreversible quality. At 8 a.m. sharp, a flatbed truck with a crane arm rumbled down the street. Alex's electric lizard was mercifully gone. For the day, Karen stood on her porch, directing the operation like a general on a battlefield. A little more to the left, Carlos. The edge of the planter must be precisely on the 36-inch easement line. Not 35, not 37, 30x. The two concrete behemoths were lowered into place. They were massive, each weighing over a ton. They were then filled with gravel, soil, and, as promised, a lovely arrangement of marigolds. They looked official. They looked permanent, and they formed a perfect car-proof bottleneck at the end of Alex's driveway. She waited all afternoon, the giddy anticipation making her feel decades younger. Finally, just after 5 p.m., the distant, vulgar whine of the electric lizard announced his return. He turned onto their street, and then he slowed, coming to a complete stop. He got out of the car, leaving it idling in the middle of the road. Walked up to the planters. He looked at them from the left. He looked at them from the right. He took out his phone and appeared to be measuring the gap with some kind of app. Karen watched, savoring his silence. There would be no witty email. This time, there would be no loophole. She had beaten him with concrete and marigolds. He looked up, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on her, standing proudly on her porch. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defeated. He looked thoughtful. He gave a single, slow nod, a gesture that was impossible to interpret. Then he got back in his car, backed up, and parked it on the street, a good 50 feet from his house. The next few days were a quiet, cold war. Alex parked on the street, which was technically legal but inconvenient. He had to haul his groceries and gym bag a considerable distance. Karen, in turn, began documenting his on-street parking, building a new file. If he ever left it there for more than 72 consecutive hours, she could have it ticketed and potentially towed. The planters, now known in Brenda's gossip circle as Karen's Checkpoint Charlie's, became a neighborhood landmark. But Karen noticed a change in Alex's routine. The late-night meetings stopped. The couriers dwindled. He was home, but he was quiet. Too quiet. She saw him on his phone a lot, walking around his property, sometimes pacing in his driveway behind the planters. Looking up at the sky one afternoon, a man in a crisp suit carrying a surveyor's wheel and a clipboard knocked on Alex's door. They spent an hour walking around the yard, the driveway, taking measurements, and looking at documents. Karen watched them through her binoculars, her heart beginning to pound with a new anxiety. This wasn't a lawyer. This was something else. A building inspector, a contractor. A week later, the first official letter arrived. It wasn't from a law firm. It was from the Federal Aviation Administration. It was addressed to all residents within a 500-foot radius of 42 Crestwood Meadows. Subject: Notice of application for private use, heliport registration, air resident. This letter is to inform you that an application has been filed by Mr. Alexander Chen with the FAA for the registration of a private-use heliport helipad at the location of 42 Crestwood Meadows. The application seeks to designate a 25 feet by 25 paved area, currently serving as a private driveway, for occasional, non-commercial landings and takeoffs of a single-engine light helicopter. As part of the review process, community feedback is being solicited. Karen read the words again and again. Heliport, helicopter. It didn't make sense. It was a prank. It had to be a prank. A joke of such colossal, absurd proportions that it defied all logic. No one registers their driveway as a helipad, especially not in the middle of Crestwood Meadows. There had to be a rule, an HOA rule, a city ordinance, a law of God. Even she tore through the covenant. Nothing about aircraft. Richard had never anticipated this. She called the city planning office. The clerk was audibly baffled. A private helipad. Ma'am, as long as they meet federal FAA guidelines and our noise ordinances, there's actually no specific prohibition. It's zoned residential, not flight restricted. The final blow came in a second envelope, delivered by courier. It was from Alex Chen. Inside was not a letter, but a single, glossy photograph. It was an aerial shot of his house, clearly taken from a drone. In the photo, someone had used Photoshop to draw her to concrete planters, and next to them was a caption, written in a jaunty, cheerful font. Thank you for your generous contribution to my new helipad's perimeter safety barrier. Your gateway beautification initiative perfectly meets the FAA's recommended guidelines for blast, deflection, and foreign object debris containment. Couldn't have done it without you. He hadn't been defeated by the planters. He hadn't been inconvenienced. He had incorporated them into a new, infinitely more insane plan. She, Karen Becker, the guardian of order, had personally funded and installed the safety features for a private helipad. The concrete wasn't a blockade. It was an accessory. She stumbled back from her front door, the photograph trembling in her hand. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had been playing checkers, meticulously setting up her pieces, while he had been playing three-dimensional chess in a language she couldn't comprehend. She had blocked his car, so he had decided to abandon ground travel altogether. A low, rhythmic sound began to permeate the quiet afternoon air. A distant, steady, chopping hump, hump, hump. It was getting louder. All up and down the street, people were coming out of their houses, looking up at the sky. Brenda, Gerald, Mrs. Higgins, all of them staring, pointing. Karen walked, numb, to her front window. The sound was deafening now, a physical pressure against the glass. A shadow fell over her prize-winning petunias, hovering over the street. Then slowly, impossibly, descending towards number 42, was a sleek, black helicopter. It turned, its nose pointed directly at her house. Before beginning its final approach into the space behind the planters she had wanted to control his driveway. He was about to land on it. The helicopter was a Bell 5, a machine of predatory elegance painted in a matte black that seemed to absorb the very sunlight. As it descended, the world dissolved into a vortex of controlled chaos. The hump of the rotors became a deafening, visceral roar that vibrated deep in Karen's bones, rattling the windows of her house and the teeth in her skull. It was a sound that did not belong in Crestwood Meadows. It was the sound of an invasion. Then came the wind. A hurried downdraft slammed into the manicured perfection of her front yard. Her prize-winning Jubilee pink petunias, which had just won her the HOA's Garden of the Month award, were blasted with the force of a fire's topsoil. Mulch and delicate pink petals were ripped from the earth and flung into the air, creating a gritty brown tornado that pelted her house. Her perfectly clean windows were instantly streaked with mud. The Garden of the Month sign itself, a symbol of her dominance, was torn from its moorings and sent tumbling across the lawn like a piece of litter. Through the maelstrom of her own ruined garden, she watched, mesmerized with horror. The helicopter's skids touched down on Alex Chun's driveway with a delicate precision that belied its violent arrival. The landing zone, the very driveway she had tried to render useless, was now a designated helipad, her own concrete planters standing guard like loyal sentinels. The rotors began to slow, their roar subsiding into a rhythmic, powerful sigh. A door swung open, and Alex Chen hopped out. He was wearing sunglasses, and the same infuriatingly calm expression. He ducked under the slowing blades, gave a casual thumbs up to the pilot, and then turned. He looked directly at Karen's house, at the muddy windows, and the debris-strewn lawn. He raised his sunglasses, and for a fleeting second, Karen thought she saw a flicker of something not malice, not triumph, but perhaps a kind of clinical pity. Then he gave a small polite wave, turned, and walked into his house as if he had just gotten out of a taxi. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise that had preceded it. The entire neighborhood was outside now, a silent, stunned audience. They were staring at the helicopter, a black metal insect resting peacefully in their suburban cul-de-sac. Then, one by one, their gazes shifted. They looked at Karen's ravaged front yard. They looked at the concrete planters. And then they looked at her, a lone figure framed in a dirt-streaked window. In their eyes, she saw the dawning, horrifying realization of the truth. She hadn't just been outmaneuvered, she had authored her own humiliation. The architect of order had sown pure chaos. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Her phone began to ring. It was Gerald, his voice a high-pitched squeal of panic. Karen, a helicopter, a real helicopter. My prize-winning roses are destroyed. The wind knocked over my ceramic gnome. His name was Winston. Before she could respond, another call beeped in. It was Brenda. Karen, what have you done? There's potting soil in my swimming pool. Do you know what that does to a filter system? This is all your fault. The planters. Everyone is saying you provoked him. The calls kept coming. People she had lorded the covenant over for years. People she had fined for leaving their garbage cans out too long, or for having unapproved seasonal wreaths on their doors, were now united against her. The helicopter was the catalyst, but her reign had been the kindling. The downdraft had blown away more than her petunias. It had blown away the fragile veneer of fear and respect she had commanded. She was no longer the powerful HOA president. She was the crazy lady who started a war with the guy who owned a helicopter. That evening, an official email landed in her inbox. The subject line was, Emergency Board Meeting, Motion of No Confidence. It was from Gerald, the man who used to alphabetize his socks. He had called a meeting with the express purpose of removing her as president. Brenda had already seconded the motion. Desperate, Karen retreated to her office, the sanctum that now felt like a bunker. She looked at the picture of Richard. Order is the foundation of a civilized life, he used to say. What would he have done? Richard was a man of procedure, of boss. He would never have let it get this personal. He would have found a compromise. But the time for compromise was long gone. She frantically searched the covenant again, her fingers flying through the pages. There had to be something. Noise ordinances. Section 21.3 was specific about leaf blowers and construction, but silent on turbine engines. Safety regulations. Section 28.1 mentioned attractive nuisances like untended swimming pools. But a federally regulated aircraft was in a different league. Her last hope was the law. She called McGill, of McGill & Sons. A helicopter, he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and undisguised avarice. He landed a helicopter in his driveway. Yes, Karen said, a flicker of hope igniting. It caused thousands of dollars in damages to my property, to everyone's property. It's a public nuisance. It's dangerous. There was a pause. Karen, McGill said, and the tone was not what she wanted to hear. It was the tone of a man delivering bad news. Did he violate any laws? He landed a helicopter in a suburb. Yes. But was the helipad registered with the FAA? Yes. Did he violate the city's noise ordinance time restrictions? No, it was 5:15 p.m. Did he land on his own property? Yes. McGill sighed, a sound that cost Karen at least $50. Karen, this is what we call a novel legal situation. Fighting the FAA is not like fighting a guy over a fence. They have more lawyers than God, and this Chen character, with his Sterling, Thorne, and Davenport attorneys, this is not a fight you can win. He's been meticulous. He's checkmated you within the bounds of the law. Then came the final turn of the screw. In fact, Karen McGill continued, his voice shifting to an even more alarming register. I received a courtesy call from Eleanor Vance this afternoon. Karen's blood ran cold. Eleanor Vance, the partner from the high-powered law firm. She wanted to inform me that her client, Mr. Chen, is compiling a comprehensive list of damages caused by your installation of the non-compliant and hazardous concrete planters. What? They were permitted there for beautification? According to Ms. Vance, your planters created a narrowed, hazardous entrance that prevented emergency vehicle access to her client's property, a clear violation of State Fire Code the 2nd of January 304. She claims that had there been a medical or fire emergency, your planters would have directly impeded first responders. She also mentioned that by goading her client into an escalatory response, you, as president of the HOA, have exposed the entire association to massive liability claims from the other residents, whose property was damaged by the helicopter's downdraft. She called it proximate cause due to presidential malfeasance. Karen sank into her chair, the phone feeling slick in her hand. It was a masterpiece of legal jiu-jitsu. He was going to sue her for the very planters she had used to trap him. He was going to blame her for the damage his own helicopter had caused. And the worst part was, it sounded plausible. She had acted alone, unilaterally, out of spite. She had created the condition that led to the chaos. The next morning, she didn't dare look out her front window. She knew what she would see: her ruined garden, the monolithic planters, and the black helicopter, which had remained parked on the driveway overnight, a silent, menacing monument to her failure. She sat at her dining room table, the no-confidence motion email open on her laptop. The meeting was tonight. She was going to be publicly stripped of her title, her power, her very identity. She had been the queen of this small beige kingdom, and now she was just a pariah in a house with muddy windows. Then, she heard a polite knock on her front door. Not the aggressive rap of a process server, but a quiet, civilized knock. Peeking through the peephole, her heart leaped into her throat. It was Alex Chen. He was alone, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. What did he want? To gloat? To serve her papers himself? To demand she pay for the marigolds and the planters she'd already paid for? With her world crumbling around her, she did the only thing she could think of. She opened the door. Part 5. The unlikely armistice. Alex Chen stood on her doorstep, an island of calm amidst the wreckage of her front lawn. He held out one of the coffee cups. I figured you might need this, he said. His voice was even, without a trace of the mockery she had expected. It's a latte. Hope that's okay. Karen stared at him, then at the cup, as if it might be a trick. What do you want? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. To talk? He said simply. May I come in? I promise not to track any of your former garden into the house. The self-awareness of the remark, acknowledging the damage without rubbing it in, was disarming. Numbly, she stepped aside and led him into her home. Her pristine, orderly home, which now felt like a fortress under siege. He walked into her living room, taking in the perfect placement of the furniture, the spotless surfaces, the framed photo of Richard on the mantelpiece. He didn't sit. I'm sorry about your petunias, he began, setting the coffees down on a coaster on her table. The vortex dynamics of the downdraft were a little more energetic than the simulation predicted. I've arranged for a landscaping company to come by this afternoon to restore everything. For you, for Gerald, for anyone else who had damage. My expense, of course. Karen was speechless. This was not the behavior of a gloating victor. This was something else entirely. The emergency board meeting that evening was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The atmosphere was thick with attention, usually reserved for hostage negotiations. When Karen walked in, the half-dozen residents who had gathered fell silent. They were expecting a fight, a final desperate stand from their deposed queen. They were not prepared for what they got. Karen walked to the small lectern at the front of the room, her face calm and her posture erect. She did not carry the thick binder of the covenant. She carried a single sheet of paper. Good evening, she began, her voice steady and clear, projecting through the room without a microphone. I will keep this brief. It has become clear to me that my leadership of the Homeowners Association has ceased to serve the best interests of this community. My actions, born of a genuine but misguided desire to uphold standards, have created discord instead of harmony. They led directly to the unusual events of yesterday. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the small audience. Therefore, effective immediately, I am resigning my position as president of the Crestwood Meadows HOA. I offer my sincerest apologies to all residents for the disruption and distress my recent decisions have caused. I have spoken with Mr. Chen, and he has graciously agreed to cover all costs for the landscaping repairs. She folded the paper and placed it on the lectern. That is all. The silence in the room was one of pure shock. Gerald, who had been sweating profusely while preparing his no-confidence speech, looked as if he might actually faint from relief. Brenda's jaw was slack. Karen Becker, the iron-fisted ruler of their cul-de-sac kingdom, had just surrendered unconditionally. She turned and walked out of the clubhouse before anyone could ask a question, leaving a stunned board to figure out what to do next. The walk home felt different. The air was cool and smelled of freshly turned earth from the landscapers who had, as promised, already begun their work. The helicopter was gone. The planters remained, for now, but they no longer looked like instruments of war. They just looked like planters. In the days that followed, a strange peace settled over Crestwood Meadows. And over Karen. She began dismantling the surveillance state in her office, shredding years of meticulously documented minor infractions. She threw out the box of orange violation stickers. In a final symbolic act, she took the heavy, leather-bound covenant and placed it not in the trash, but on a high shelf in a dusty closet. Like a historical artifact from a bygone era, she started taking walks, not to patrol, but just to walk. She exchanged tentative, then genuinely friendly greetings with her neighbors. Mrs. Higgins offered her a cutting from her prize-winning bougainvillea. Gerald brought over a plate of cookies as a thank you. It turned out that her neighbors, freed from her oppressive reign, were actually quite pleasant people. She and Alex established a quiet, unspoken truce. They would wave when they saw each other. One afternoon, he was struggling to carry a large, flat-packed box from his Koran IKEA bookshelf. She noted with some satisfaction. Apparently not everything in his life was bespoke and expensive. On pure instinct, she walked across the street and helped him carry it inside. They didn't talk about the helicopter or the planters. They talked about the cryptic instructions for assembling Swedish furniture. It was normal, it was neighborly. Her life was smaller now, quieter, but it was also richer. The constant, simmering anger was gone, replaced by a sense of calm she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The new game she was playing was simply live in. About a month after her resignation, she was tending to her new Petunia Sahardir, more wind-resistant varietal called Shockwave Purple, when a sleek, black, town car with tinted windows pulled up in front of Alex's house. It was the kind of car that whispered of serious money and serious business. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall and slender, dressed in a brutally sharp, dark gray suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore sunglasses that hid her eyes, but not her air of absolute authority. She was carrying a thin, locked aluminum briefcase. She was the polar opposite of the casually dressed tech bros who used to visit Alex. This woman was not here for a consultation over artisanal coffee. She surveyed the neighborhood with a quick, appraising glance. Her eyes swept over the houses, the lawns, and lingered for a moment on the two concrete planters at the end of Alex's driveway. Then her gaze shifted and met Karen's. Directly across the street, behind the dark lenses of her sunglasses, Karen felt a jolt of recognition. It wasn't that she knew the woman, it was that she knew the type of woman. This was a person who operated in a world of high stakes and no mistakes, a world that made HOA disputes look like kindergarten squabbles. The woman gave Karen a thin, knowing smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that said, "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what happened here." It was a smile that acknowledged the absurdity of the helicopter incident but also seemed to file it away as a useful data point on the man she was about to meet. Then, she turned and walked with a crisp, purposeful stride to Alex Chen's front door. He opened it before she could knock, as if he had been waiting. He stepped aside to let her in, and the door closed. Leaving the quiet street to its afternoon slumber, Karen stood frozen, her gardening trowel forgotten in her hand. The peaceful narrative she had constructed for herself, the story of a simple neighborhood dispute that got out of hand, suddenly felt flimsy and naive. The helicopter. Alex had claimed it was a one-time stunt to make a point. But who registers a helipad with the FAA just for a stunt? Who has a pilot on call? Who has the kind of lawyers that can make City Hall and federal agencies bow? He had told her he was a venture capitalist, but venture capitalists invested in startups. They didn't typically require private air travel and visitors who looked like they belonged in a spy thriller. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying new logic. The obsession with privacy, the need to be unbothered, the immense, casually deplored resources, the final, chilling statement he had made to her, "You have to make the cost of messing with you higher than the reward." He hadn't been fighting a war with an annoying HOA president. His battle with her had been a distraction, yes, but it might also have been something else. A test case, a dry run to see how much disruption the neighborhood would tolerate, and a way to establish a powerful, unassailable deterrent against anyone who might get too curious about his real business. Who was Alex Chen? And more importantly, who was the woman in the black suit? And what was in that locked aluminum briefcase? Karen looked at his house, number 42. No longer seeing the home of an eccentric tech millionaire, but the headquarters of something far more complex and perhaps far more dangerous. The war was over, but she suddenly realized she had only been fighting in a minor skirmish on the edge of a much larger, invisible conflict. And she, the nosiest woman in Crestwood Meadows, had absolutely no idea what she had stumbled into. The quiet street no longer felt peaceful, it felt poised.